Hey guys, today we're going to be talking about modern Asia. After World War II, the nations of Asia had worked to kind of gain independence, but they got complicated in the Cold War tensions, and a lot of them had a lot of great success building vibrant economies and improving the lives of people in their regions. The essential question that we're going to be focusing on in this lesson is what challenges did Asian countries seeking independence experience, and then how did the leadership of Mao Zedong and communism affect China? Golden Hawk historians will examine different independence movements throughout Asia and the challenges that countries experienced as a result of independence, and summarize the different ways in which Mao Zedong and communism affected China. While you're watching, make sure that you're taking good notes in either Cornell or outline format as we've talked about in class. It's okay if you need to pause or rewind the video in order to make sure that you're taking good notes. In India, Great Britain had control for over 200 years, but by the early 1900s, the British control was starting to weaken. A movement for independence had gained strength in the early 1900s, led by Mohandas Gandhi, who had started to organize peaceful protest on two very important concepts: ahimsa, or nonviolence, which you might remember is one of the values of Buddhism, and civil disobedience, or the refusal to obey unjust laws. Gandhi encouraged Indians to boycott British rule. They were often arrested, but this increased public sympathy for their cause, and in 1935, the British Parliament gave Indians a limited degree of self-rule. However, when World War II began, the British informed India that Indians would fight for the Allies rather than asking them. The Indian National Congress and Gandhi refused to support the war effort, and so they immediately imprisoned him and other Congress officials. When World War II ended, the British began making plans to leave India, though. India had two main religious groups that would make independence complicated: the Hindus and the Muslims. There are other smaller numbers of Indians who were Sikhs, Christians, or Buddhist, and hopes for independence rose, so did the religious tensions. A lot of Muslims feared that independent democratic India would be dominated by India's large Hindu population, and that the Indian Muslims needed to have a separate nation just to protect themselves. In 1940, the Muslim League formally called for a partition, or a division of India, and the creation of a separate Muslim and Hindu countries. The violence between the Muslims and the Hindus had increased during the early 1940s. The British decided to divide India into separate Hindu and Muslim nations, and so two separate nations were created. India was the main country that was Hindu, and then there was Muslim East and West Pakistan. West Pakistan is now known, or East Pakistan is now known as Bangladesh. In China, communism had kind of taken hold after World War II under the leadership of Mao Zedong. The national government agreed to put aside their differences in order to fight the Japanese invaders. But during the war, the nationalist forces outnumbered Mao's communists, and even though the communists had wide support, mainly from the peasant classes. On October 1st, 1949, Mao Zedong announced the creation of the People's Republic of China. The communist ideology mainly shaped the new communist government's efforts to change China's political and economic systems. The government discouraged the practice of religion, seized property from rural landowners, and redistributed amongst the peasants. They put in place Soviet-style 5-year plans for industrial development and began using secret police to try to eliminate any enemies of the state. The Soviet Union provided a lot of financial support and other aid to China in the first years as a communist nation. China overall modeled many of its new political, economic, and military policies on the Soviet Union. During the 1950s, however, they began to break away from the Soviets due to ideological and territorial disputes. Mao announced the Great Leap Forward, a plan designed to increase China's industrial and agricultural output. The plan was to create communes, or collectively owned farms, of about 200,000 people each. 20,000 people each. The plan was a disaster and millions of Chinese starved to death. In the mid-1960s, Mao tried to regain some of the power he had lost during the Great Leap Forward by initiating a new movement called the Cultural Revolution. The Cultural Revolution sought to rid China of its old ways and create a new society in which peasants and physical labor were the ideal. The campaign meant eliminating intellectuals such as teachers, skilled workers, and artists who Mao feared wanted to end communism and bring back China's old ways. Mao shut down China's schools and encouraged militant high school and college students known as the Red Guards to carry out the work of the Cultural Revolution. But the Red Guards took it a little bit too far, and so they began traveling through China's cities and villages looking for offenders and torturing and killing anyone they thought to believe politically corrupt or against the Cultural Revolution. By the time of the 1960s, Mao had kind of lost a lot of support and also a lot of control before he was able to break up the Red Guards finally. China began to end its isolation from the rest of the world in the early 1970s. U.S. President Richard Nixon ended decades of U.S. hostility toward the nation by visiting China in 1972. During the last years of Mao's life, much of the power was held by four people known as the Gang of Four, who were mainly responsible for the worst features of the Cultural Revolution, meaning all the killing and torture. Mao Zedong had died in 1976, and he was replaced by Deng Xiaoping. Deng sought to reform China's economy through a plan called the Four Modernizations that sought to modernize four areas: agriculture, industry, science, and technology. The Chinese, however, were inspired by the revolutions against the Soviets in Eastern Europe. Many Chinese started demanding more political freedoms and moving toward a government that resembled democracy. More than 1 million pro-democracy protesters occupied Beijing's Tiananmen Square. After repeatedly asking the protesters to leave, the Chinese government ordered that tanks and troops move into the square that killed many protesters in the Tiananmen Square massacre. In the picture in the top right-hand corner, you can see the tanks moving in on a protester. North and South Korea had remained a divided nation after the end of the Korean War. In North Korea, there was a communist dictator, Kim Il-sung, who formed a government based on the Soviet model with a lot of support from the Soviet Union. The state controlled most of the economy, and most of the spending was spent on industry and the military. When Kim Il-sung died, his son, Kim Jong-il, took power. Under Kim Jong-il, the North Korean economy has continued to deteriorate. Kim Jong-il was succeeded by his son, Kim Jong-un, who is now the leader of North Korea in 2011. South Korea, with the help of the United States, has built up the nation's industries, emphasizing foreign trade and the production of consumer goods. South Koreans have had little freedom or political stability. Now that you've finished watching the video, make sure that you read back over your notes and you have all the necessary vocabulary. Thanks for joining me for this video, and I'll see you in class.